Jesus had 12 disciples, and they all came to tragic ends. But which ones were the worst? I'm going to be ranking every disciple's death with the help of this tier list, from peaceful to painful to very painful to excruciating to So let's get started. Matthew, one of Jesus' disciples, his nickname was Levi, kind of like the jeans. Before he was a disciple, he was a tax collector. So he had to deal with people and get their taxes collected. So you kind of think Matthew must have been kind of a tough guy. He knew how to handle himself dealing with unhappy people, because when you ask people to pay taxes, they tend to get kind of unhappy. Well, after Jesus died and rose, he said to his 12 disciples, go and spread the word, the truth of my word to everywhere. And Matthew apparently went to Egypt and northern Africa. Legend has it, we have, this is not from the Bible, but from legends from after that, is that he was burned alive, burned at the stake. And so that'd be a horrible way to die. I'm going to put that in very painful. James, son of Alphaeus, known also as James the Lesser, or lesser meaning younger or shorter is what that means. We don't really know a lot about him. He isn't mentioned that often in the Bible. He was picked by Jesus to be one of the disciples. That's about all that we know. He apparently, legend has it, again, this is not from the Bible, but afterwards, that he went up to Syria and did a lot of teaching and planting churches there. And we don't really know how he died. He's martyred. That's established, that he was martyred for preaching the truth, and people eventually hated him enough for doing that. And he was likely stoned to death, which would be a very painful kind of death. So I'm going to put him into the very painful category. All right, Simon Peter. Now, Simon Peter, one of Jesus' disciples, maybe one of the more well-known disciples. His real name is Simon. Jesus gave him a nickname, Peter, which means rock, which is kind of funny because Simon was not really a rock. He was just kind of impulsive, kind of impetuous. He would do things, for example, like Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane, and the temple forces coming to arrest him. And Peter says, Lord, should we fight with the sword? And before Jesus even has a chance to answer, Peter already has his sword out, and he is slashing away, cuts off the ear of Malchus, one of the servants. But he ended up being, at least the faith he held was really a rock-solid faith. Well, Peter, and this is fairly well established, ended up dying by crucifixion. Dying by crucifixion. What a horrible way to die. But because he had such love and respect for his Lord, he said, don't crucify me with my head up and my arms stretched out like a normal crucifixion, like my Lord was crucified. Crucify me upside down. And so that's how the legend has it. Again, that's not recorded in the Bible, but pretty well established legend is he was crucified upside down. And crucifixions sometimes took 2-3 days before the person even died. So I'm going to put Peter in the excruciating category. Interesting fun fact, that's where the word excruciating comes from. Two Latin words, ex and crucio, meaning from the cross. Bartholomew. He also had two names. He was also known as Nathaniel. And again, we don't know a lot about him. He's only mentioned actually twice in the Bible. He reportedly was martyred in India. The legend is that he was flayed to death. He might have been crucified. There's another legend about his being crucified, or even that he was put into a bag and tied shut and thrown into the sea to drown. But any of those three ways of dying sound horrible to me. And so I'm going to put him in the excruciating category, part because he might have been crucified as well. James, son of Zebedee. Let's take a look at that. It's sometimes called James the Greater, meaning James either the older or the taller, and kind of part of the inner circle for Jesus. Jesus had three guys who especially were close to him. And James was the very first apostle to die, not long after Jesus ascended. And he was doing his work in Jerusalem, setting up a church and preaching the gospel in Jerusalem. King Herod had James killed with a sword. This is actually in the Bible in Acts 12. And of all the ways you could die, being stabbed to death, while that is certainly not pleasant, isn't the worst. So I'm going to put James under the painful category. Philip, again, one of the disciples Jesus picked, seems kind of a very practical guy, kind of an operations manager kind of guy, concerned like, here we've got a group of 12 disciples, and Jesus says, 13 guys, where are we going to eat for lunch? Or where are we going to stay tonight? Because Jesus was wandering around Israel, preaching and teaching in various places. In fact, and that account of the feeding of the 5,000, kind of one of the famous stories, how Jesus takes 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish and feeds 5,000 men, not including the women and children. So that would be more like 15, 20,000 people. The person he comes and asks to says, hey, where are we going to get enough food to feed all these people? He comes specifically to Philip, it says. He did his preaching. After Jesus ascended, he goes to Turkey, southern Turkey in particular, teaching and preaching the word of God, starting churches there. And legend has it that for all his trouble, Philip was stoned to death. And so not a very pleasant way to die. I'm going to put Philip into the very painful category. Thomas, sometimes called Doubting Thomas, his nickname was Didymus, which means twin. He apparently had a twin. Sometimes Thomas gets a kind of a bad rap. He didn't believe that Jesus rose from the dead. Even though the other disciples are saying, we've seen the Lord, Thomas said, I'm not going to believe it. No way. People don't come back from the dead. And maybe that was because he was a twin, and he knew that you can confuse one person for another sometimes pretty easily. And so maybe that's what he thought, that his friends had actually seen somebody who looked like Jesus, but wasn't actually. He was a missionary, legend has it, to India. It doesn't say this again in the Bible, but according to legend, to India. And interestingly enough, there's a small hill by the airport in Chennai, India, where Thomas is said to be buried. You can go there and it has a plaque and stuff and says that he's buried there. So some indication that maybe there is, maybe it is true, the legend. There is other evidence of it as well. He's died by someone taking a spear and running him through. Now, not a pleasant way to die, but at the same time, at least fairly quick. And for that reason, I'm going to put Thomas in the painful category. Andrew, kind of a behind-the-scenes guy. We hear about him, but he doesn't say much. He doesn't do much. He's always kind of behind the scenes. He was the one who brought his brother Peter to meet Jesus. Andrew had already met Jesus. This is just as Jesus' ministry is starting. So Andrew's right there at the beginning, and he's convinced this is the Messiah, the one that was promised. He gets his brother Peter and says, you got to check this guy out. He was a missionary too. After Jesus died and rose and told him, go and make disciples of all nations. He went apparently to Greece, maybe into the Ukraine, a little bit into Russia. But legend has it that he was also crucified after preaching the gospel and starting churches. He ended up being dragged out and crucified, but not on a regular cross, a cross that was shaped in an X. Yet today, if sometimes crosses are in the shape of an X, that's called a St. Andrew's cross. Because he was crucified, I'm going to put him in the excruciating category. Simon the Zealot. Why Zealot? Well, that actually described a political party in Israel. The Zealots were people who believed in violence for the sake of political freedom. And they wanted to get the Romans out of their country because in Israel was a Jewish nation, and they wanted to be in control and be in the government again. And so they would even assassinate Roman leaders sometimes. The Sicarii were kind of like, ninjas in a way. They would, when there was a Roman event going on, they would kind of just dress to blend in with the crowd and have a dagger in their belt, and they would sneak in and just walk in, unsuspecting, and get behind the governor or whatever Roman official they could get behind, and then stab him in the back, through the kidneys and up into the heart, if they could reach that far, and then leave the dagger and go. And so they would not get caught because it would take a little bit before the governor would react to that. Simon the Zealot was part of that group. Did he ever do any assassinations? We don't know, but interesting, Jesus chose him for his 12 disciples. But Simon the Zealot was a missionary, legend has it again, to England and the British Isles up there. He was martyred but we don't know exactly how. We don't know exactly how he was martyred. So I'm going to put Simon the Zealot in the category of painful, simply because we don't know exactly how he was martyred. Interestingly enough, he apparently was martyred with Judas, son of James, and so this might give us a little insight. Judas, son of James, this is not Judas Iscariot. This is not the Judas who betrayed Jesus. It's actually a different Judas. We don't know much about him at all. He's mentioned, of course, did the things the disciples did. Beyond that, we don't know much. He apparently went to Turkey as well, primarily to do his mission work. Now, how would he and Simon the Zealot end up in the same area and be martyred together would be kind of questioning, but it is mentioned somewhere that perhaps they've been martyred together. Judas, it says, was clubbed to death. And so maybe that's how Simon the Zealot was also martyred. We don't know. It doesn't mention about that for him, but it does for Judas, also known as Thaddeus. In church art, you'll see sometimes he'll be pictured with a fuller's club, kind of looks like a little bat holding onto it, or it's pictured in the picture with him. I'm going to put him in the category of very painful. Matthias. Did you know that there was one disciple that Jesus did not pick? And that was Matthias. After Jesus ascended and they're down one because Judas is no longer there, Judas Iscariot, they said, we need one more. We were 12 before, we need to be 12 again. And they decide there's certain qualifications. It's got to be somebody who, who's been with us all of Jesus' ministry and so forth. And then they drew lots after they had these qualifications, and Matthias was chosen. That's about all that we know about him. He also, of course, went on missionary endeavors. And really the only other thing we know about him is that he likely was martyred by having his head cut off, because in church art he's pictured with, quite often, with an axe. Having your head cut off, again, not the most pleasant thing, but a pretty quick death, all things considered. And so I'm going to put him into the category of painful. Let's talk about Judas Iscariot, who is famous for betraying Jesus. In fact, his name means traitor, right? You're being a Judas. Yet today, people will. And people don't name their kids Judas very often, do they? What Judas did was he was one of the 12 disciples from the beginning, and he went out with Jesus and he preached and he saw Jesus do miracles. But after 3 years of that, he betrayed him. He agreed to the Jewish leaders, give me 30 pieces of silver and I will find a time when you can find Jesus alone and arrest him quietly. Because they were kind of concerned about maybe there'd be a riot among the people if they saw Jesus being arrested. And Judas did that. And he regretted it. He regretted it so much. He felt so guilty. He went back to the Jewish leaders, threw the 30 pieces of silver back to them. But he didn't ask his Lord for forgiveness. He just felt so guilty. His Lord would have forgiven him. Absolutely. That's why he was going to die on the cross. But instead, what Judas did is he went out and he hanged himself. Now, that may not sound like the worst kind of death, considering what we've heard of some of the rest, but what makes his death so horrible is he ended up in hell. The scriptures say that he went to his own place. The other disciples died terrible deaths. That is true, but they ended up in heaven and enjoying the blessedness of heaven for all eternity, but not Judas. So I would place him under, I'm going to put him in the worst kind of death. Now John, son of Zebedee. John, James' brother, one of Jesus' best, that was the disciple Jesus loved. That is, they were best friends. Because Jesus, being true God, he also was true man. He had best friends like we all do. And John died not by being crucified, not by being flayed, not by being stoned to death, not by having his head chopped off, not by being stabbed by a spear. He died of old age, and he died in his home in the city of Ephesus, which is in Turkey. And so we're going to put him into the category of peaceful death. Although at the same time, you got to be kind of sad for him to see all of his friends and his co-workers being martyred as he just gets older and older, and he's finally left. He's the only one left at the end. That must have been kind of sad for him. It brings us to Jesus. Jesus, of course, not one of the disciples. He was the leader of the disciples. But because he's on this tier list, I'm gonna rank his death as well. I'm gonna put him right here into the worst possible death. Because he took the sins of the whole world on himself, which must have been horrible. He was sinless, and he paid for it all. Even the horrible, horrible death, he suffers the torments of the damned for everyone, because he doesn't want us to have to experience that. He wants us to be able to be with him forever in heaven. So he paid for our sins and says, here's my gift to you. I give it to you through my gospel, through baptism, through Lord's Supper. Receive it by faith and live forever with me in heaven. Yeah, so that for the believer, death actually becomes the best day of our life. We get to live forever in heaven with Jesus, his gift to us. In fact, he wants everybody in heaven. That's why he died, to make it a gift. You don't got to earn it. But if he wants everybody in heaven, then why did he ever make a hell? Well, I've actually addressed that question. If you want to hear the answer, watch the video on screen.